Welcome to Jewish Cinémathèque, where we meet some of the important faces involved with films that tackle aspects of the Jewish experience. Today I'm joined by film producer-director Yael Melamede, whose film Ada, My Mother the Architect, looks at the extraordinary life and legacy of Israel Prize awardee, Ada Karmi Melamede, one of Israel's most accomplished architects. Ada helped shape many of Israel's most iconic institutions, like the Supreme Court building, Gurion Airport, the campus of the Open University in Ra'anana, and Ben-Gurion University in the Negev. The film is a deeply personal film, not only focusing on architecture and Ada's accomplishments, but also touching on the tensions between career and motherhood. Yael also brings to the screen a mother-daughter bond that is most unique.
אוקיי, מה נתחיל?
מה את רוצה לדעת?
אני רוצה שכולם ידעו שאת אוהבת אותי.
She's one of the most prolific and profound women architects in the world today.
עדה, אין כמו עדה, הסלט של אור.
I think it's beautiful what she does.
התפקיד של האדריכלות בעצם זה למצוא את השותפות שבין הדברים, כי בלי מכנה משותף אין לנו שפה.
זה גם נכון לחיים, לא?
כן, גם נכון בחיים. רוב הבניינים כמעט עד סוף המאה ה-19 היו בניינים שהיה להם מרכז. אבל אפשר היה להגיד שהם נהיים קצת יותר רומנטיים, שכשהיה מרכז היה לב לבניין. אז היום יש בניינים שאין להם לב, בכל המובנים.
Do you think it was harder for women?
I thought that it's a profession only for men like my brother and my father. It was really, really tough. Working on the Supreme Court changed my life.
It's crazy. Everyone thinks you should enter into some bombastic lobby, but you have this grand staircase, and then Jerusalem is right in front of you.
אני מתרגש.
One of the conditions of the Supreme Court contract was that she would only spend a few weeks a year outside of Israel. But she had 3 kids in the States.
יש משהו שאת רוצה לשאול אותי?
כן, איך את מצליחה לאהוב אותי כל כך הרבה שנים? מה כל כך מצחיק? אני לא איתך. We're not used to think about time. We think that time only happens to others. But it happens to everybody.
And the alone never gets to be too much?
Of course it's too much, but also togetherness is too much. It's all a question of proportion.
After wearing a producer's hat for over 20 documentaries, this is the 3rd film that Yael has directed. The previous 2 films were Floyd Abrams' Speaking Freely, focusing on Abrams' work with the First Amendment, and Honesty, the Truth About Lies, a study of the behavioral reasons why people fib. Yael, welcome to Jewish Cinémathèque.
Thank you so much for having me.
I must tell you, this film is so multi-dimensional. You tackle so many things, and yet it's a study of mom. I mean, it's incredible. Let me just start with some of the structural questions, some of the cinematic pieces. I mean, you made some cinematic choices in terms of 90-degree angles and split screen, and can you talk about your choices and how your background as an architect sort of played into that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the first film that I've directed and definitely the most ambitious visually. The other ones were, in a way, more traditional, and this one we experimented a lot. But I didn't go into this film knowing what the structure would be at all. I thought this might be a more chronological story, and instead we developed a language that I really fell in love with that was so architectural, and I kind of loved that at the end of the day I looked at the language we had created and thought, this is so obvious, but it was in no way obvious when we began.
As a documentarian, I mean, people expect, just sort of recordings and whatever, and all of a sudden it's split, it breaks, it shifts. You're looking at different angles. You're seeing you and your mother across a table, and then the next thing you know, you're talking across the screen. I mean, can you talk a little bit about how that developed? Were you working with your editor, your cinematographer, what?
Yeah, we had recorded a lot of different interviews. I mean, this whole film was so much an experiment in the way it was made. I didn't intend to be in the film, which is hard to believe if you see the film now. I didn't intend my mother to be in the film so much, and she is the dominant figure in the whole film. So really things changed as we looked and listened to what was working and what wasn't working. And at a certain point, we were searching for a distinctive visual language. I felt like we all felt that we weren't getting there somehow to something that matched the words. And so I was working with I had the opportunity of working with two wonderful cinematographers on this film, and one of them comes from a fiction background. And he said to me at some point, or he showed me a portrait that he had done of someone, and it was very beautiful. And he said, well, we accomplished that by turning the camera vertically, which I thought was a terrible idea. But we tried it, and it was beautiful. And we filmed with two cameras at the same time, and my editor took those images and put them together. And of course I was like, oh, this is exactly an architect's language, because you're seeing someone in two elevations at the same time. And then we had room for text, which was really translation on the area that was left blank. And it was perfect. It was just completely obvious. And I love solutions like that, when all of a sudden it's obvious and you say, oh, that's it. But the distance between where we started and where we ended, I could have never known that's where we were going. It was really beautiful.
So you say you really did want to focus so much on your mom. Was it you were going to focus more on her architecture?
Well, I thought there would be other voices. I thought it would be more people talking about her. I didn't think, because I think in part because I know her so well, I thought, well, we have to get other people to explain why she's so interesting and why her work is so important. But the more we interviewed, the more we looked at the materials, the way she speaks about architecture, it kind of casts a spell, and that spell just got bigger and bigger. And the other voices felt less important and less interesting.
And yet the other voices were Frank Gehry, Moshe Safdie, I mean, some of the great architects of the world, as is your mom. Maybe not sufficiently recognized, but it was so nice to hear from them. And the other architects who spoke, just really terrific. You made a decision to take the camera into the buildings. What was that like? I mean, that's tough. How do you capture a building, a structure, through the camera lens?
Well, actually, what I said before, that this was all a matter of experimentation, was so true. I was really excited as a former architect and now filmmaker to be able to go into the buildings and use a moving camera to show you what movement through a building looks like. And in fact, the film has has very few moving images within the buildings. We tried it and spent maybe 4 days trying to capture the sense of movement in the buildings. And what we realized, which in some ways seems obvious after the fact, but was so not obvious when we started, was that if you don't have people in the buildings and you film moving through them, they look like dead places. And so what we tried after that experiment failed was to track the light in the buildings, and that became the actor through time-lapse photography. And that ends up being the device that we use the most in the film, which also, after the fact, seems so obvious because my mother is so obsessed with light, that to give that actor the light, the spotlight, makes complete sense.
She's so obsessed with light, and yet in the middle of the film she talks about how glass buildings are destroying architecture. Rootedness is a key issue. You break the film down into 5 chapters, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, the first chapter is Roots.
That's right.
Your mom is part of a generation. I guess we could call them the Livnot to Lihibanot generation. She was there to make a difference, to build the land. Literally, in her case, she actually did build the buildings, and to be built up by it. Your grandfather, Dov Karmi, was, I guess he brought brutalism to some extent.
That was my uncle.
Oh, your uncle.
My grandfather brought kind of the more modernist Bauhaus. He was part of the generation of Bauhaus architecture and what we call white architecture in Israel.
So you think of those buildings on the Tel Aviv beach, that whole slew of buildings.
The Tel Aviv beach, and along the boulevards, Rothschild Boulevard and Ben Gurion Boulevard, there's kind of a pattern of 3 to 4 story buildings with terraces that were very much part of a particular movement. And then Rami, who went to study at the AA in England brought brutalism from the UK.
This is your uncle?
This is my uncle. He brought brutalism to Israel, which really suits the desert climate, you know, because it's concrete gives you a lot of shade. It gets softer over time. I think in many ways brutalism suits places like Israel much more than places like the UK. It gets very sad in the rain, but it's quite protective and offers shelter in a desert landscape like Israel.
So your mom was an architect like her brother, like her father, like her daughter, and yet she made a decision to teach. Was that because there were limitations for her as a young architect in Israel? Is that why she picked up, or was it because the family had moved to the States because of your dad?
It was definitely moving here. She did not really, I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to make the film is because, well, there were many reasons, but one of them was I think my mother is such an interesting character. She's so shy and modest on the one hand, and so incredibly powerful and strong on the other. And I think that's an interesting contradiction. And when she came to the US, she really was even more shy. She didn't feel like she spoke English that well. She talks about going to the supermarket, everything was supersized, like she didn't understand. Everything seemed very foreign. And so things were big steps for her. And she was lucky enough to find a job at an office where she had a mentor who was also an immigrant to the US. His name was Romaldo Jorgala. And he took her under his wing and hired her for his office, but also took her with him to Columbia University and said, I think you should come teach. And so in the film, there's a lovely scene where she says, so I came to my father, her husband Amos, and said, Aldo says I should teach, and what am I going to do? I don't like to speak publicly. And he said, and my father says to her, don't worry, just try. New York's a big place. If you fail, nobody will know.
Wow.
Yeah.
And she was at Columbia not just for 1 or 2 years. She was there for
14 years.
14 years.
And one of the things that's come out, you know, I always knew she was a loved teacher, but I didn't realize to what extent she'd had an impact on people's lives really until this film came out. I kind of knew, oh, well, she had a really big impact on the student who's in the film and a few others who just spoke about her so beautifully. But the number of emails, letters that we've gotten since the film came out about how she really, really influenced their lives and their practice and their architectural thinking has just been amazing. I always thought her legacy would be so much in built form, and I've come to appreciate how much her legacy is also in terms of thought and inspiration.
And they've been coming to screenings?
Yeah, they've been coming to screenings. They had a reunion at one architect's office. Yeah, I mean, you know, the letters are just extraordinary, and kind of how much they can quote her. They remember sentences so well from what she said back then.
So here she was a professor at Columbia, and this is one of the key issues in the film, and she doesn't get tenure. Now, that was a time when you had to publish and you had to, you know, and she was apparently an amazing teacher, but was that not enough, or was it possibly because she was a woman?
I think that was not enough. I think there wasn't a precedent for women getting tenure. There were very few, and I think she was just passed over.
Now she made a decision to go back to Israel. From what we learn in the film, and I don't want to give it all away because you must see this film. It's just amazing. But she's in Israel, and what happened? She gets a call from her brother? No. Yes, is that what happened?
You know, it never felt, people sometimes look at the film and say, how could she have left? And she didn't really, it wasn't like she packed her bags one day and said, I'm going back to Israel. She just said, I'm going to spend a little bit more time in Israel. My brother at the time was in the army in Israel. He had volunteered, so she wanted to spend a little bit more time there. So she spent a bit more time, and she started working in the office, and work started coming. and then they were invited for the competition for the Supreme Court of Israel, and that was obviously so important. So she stayed, you know, much more, and then they won, and then it was absolutely clear that for the however long it was going to take to build that building, she was going to be in Israel, and then her career took off. So it was a gradual and then fast process, but it wasn't so conscious that she just said, I am leaving, I'm done, I'm angry. I think it was, for her, it was more she was hurt and she wanted to get away a little bit, and so she got away a little bit, and that's how it felt.
Her father was already gone. He had passed
Yeah,
away.
her father had passed away very young. He had an extraordinary career. He died at the age of 56, but had designed over 200 buildings in Israel. There was such a great need at that time, and the buildings really are extraordinary.
And how many buildings has your mother designed? Buildings, homes, institutions?
It's a good question. I think probably 50 or 60. It's weird that I don't know the number,
That's
but
okay.
somewhere.
The numbers don't matter.
Yeah.
It's what
But the number of civic institutions that she's been involved with is really extraordinary for any architect. You know, quantity-wise, I think there are many, many architects who've done much more, who've done many more private homes, but the nature of her work that has been so public and so civic in terms of universities and other institutions is really quite remarkable, especially for a woman.
And here's a clip from Ada, my mother, the architect.
פרס ישראל באדריכלות מוענק לאדריכלית עדה כרמי מלמד. על תרומתה החשובה לאדריכלות בישראל, על עבודותיה הנחקרות והמצוטטות במיטב ספרות המחקר המקצועית בעולם.
בכל זאת חשוב לי להגיד שתמיד יש איזה שחקן סמוי שהוא דחף והוא בעצם גרם להרבה מאוד דברים שקורים לאדם. במקרה המשפחתי שלי יש אימא אחת שדחפה את כולם, והאמת היא מגיעה לפרס ביותר מאשר לכולנו ביחד. גם אבי קיבל פרס, גם אחי קיבל פרס וגם אני, אבל אם רק יכולתי הייתי מביאה לה את תעודת הבגרות הזאת ואומרת לה תודה.
As a documentarian, in your previous work, you're off on the side asking questions. When did you decide that it was appropriate to place yourself into the film?
I was a very unwilling, well, I became a willing participant, but
Unwilling more than your mother?
No, not so much. No, it really, I was there to kind of coax her and encourage her to participate. And then at a certain point, it just became clear that we needed a vehicle to show her personality. And her personality came out really well when I was around, because we're so close. And so it seemed obvious that somebody needed to enter the frame, and I couldn't think of somebody else. I wish I had. I think it would have been really interesting. But
No. There's moments where she basically says, what are you bothering me for, in effect? You know, what about you? You know, I mean, it's wonderful to watch the back and forth between the two of you.
We could have made a whole film with the outtakes of her saying, I think you're wasting your time, I think you're wasting your money. One of the really lovely things that I had a fabulous editor. Her name is Sharon Yaish. She's an Israeli editor and filmmaker in her own right. And towards the end of the editing process, we were looking at a cut down, and she kind of leaned back after we watched, and she said, you know, I just can't remember the last time I saw a film about a mother-daughter that was so filled with mutual respect. And I really loved that framing of it, because she didn't say love, and I think there's a lot of love in the film. But I do think there's an unusual mutual respect between us, and that somewhere she really doesn't want to do this, but she has this respect for me as a professional, as a person, that if I'm going to do it, she's going to show up. And I think I too, started this obviously out of respect for her, but you know, there's a kind of tremendous respect for her, and even her kind of unwillingness to do it, and showing that part of it as a part of respect, not to make believe that it was easy for her, or that she wanted entirely to do it, or that she thought it was that she was deserving of it, and to show kind of some of those, some of the personal moments.
You were a teenager when your mom left to go to Israel. At that time, that was, for a mother to leave behind her children, her husband, and go back to Israel was quite a step. And yet, it seems that the love between the two of you is even greater today than it was beautiful to watch. As a teenager, what was it like to have your mother, 6,000 miles away?
Yeah, I really didn't feel like she had left. It just seemed like she was busy somewhere else. And my dad traveled a lot too. I was a very independent teenager. I kind of loved that they had this faith that I was fine on my own. I think New York is a really great city to be on your own as a kid. We lived in an apartment buildings. There was a doorman, so I felt very safe.
And your siblings were older?
And my siblings were older and out of the house. So I never felt in any way abandoned. I just felt like they were doing important things wherever they were, and I was going to do my work and do it well, and everything was fine. And I think there was tremendous security in knowing that I could call them at any time and say, I need you here right now, and that they would have dropped everything to come. I never tried it, and I think it might have been good for me if I had. But I never did, but I always felt that that was absolutely the truth, that I could rely on it 100%.
Was there pressure on you to follow into the family business?
Not at all.
And to become an architect?
Not
and yet
at all.
You did.
Yes, I think it was a very unlikely choice. And it was really, the truth is that in terms of my trajectory, I also left home at 16. So it wasn't that my mom started going back to Israel and wasn't around as much from the time I was 13 or 14. We can't actually quite figure out the exact timing. That's how vague it was. And then I left home at 16 and went to college. I went very early. So, and in college I discovered photography. I think if it hadn't been for photography, I would have been a lawyer. I would have gone to law school. But I discovered photography and fell in love with it, hook, line, and sinker. And went to work in photography in Israel after I graduated from college. And
so you, like your siblings, went back to Israel for a period of time.
I went back to Israel. I tried to volunteer for the army in Israel. They told me by then I was too old and useless for the army.
So that connection with the state of Israel was still so strong.
Definitely. We went back every summer. We spent the summers with my grandmother, who's featured a little bit in the film, who was really a total force of nature. And there was this feeling, even though we never went back, that it was very possible that we would go back at certain points, and then we didn't. But I went after I finished college, worked for some photographers, and felt like I really wanted to be in a profession where the shutter is open longer. I needed something where that creative moment of capturing something was longer. And so I applied to film school, and I applied to architecture school, and I got into architecture school, and I did not get into film school.
And look at you now.
And I went to architecture school, and I think it was a very unlikely choice. I really didn't have enough skills in my hands to either draw or make models. I was a much too cerebral architect and never found the right language for me to express myself. But I loved the education. I think it's an amazing discipline, in the same way that I think law school would be a tremendous education, and then left architecture to go into film.
Although we see in the film your work that you did with your mom in terms of developing her office
and her home. That's true. I did her house.
That's no small feat.
No, I'm very proud, particularly of her apartment. Her apartment was a really beautiful project, and difficult because her apartment had been designed by her father, and so it meant destroying what he had done and then building anew. And it was a great way to appreciate his work, really appreciate it, and try to do something new that was of a different time. And that was a beautiful project, and the fact that she loves it so much is very satisfying.
You shot most of this film before October 7th. The film is coming out after October 7th. It's not a film about October 7th. It's not a film about Israel and its reaction to the massacre. Was there any pull, or how do we deal with this film and releasing it in terms of how people are seeing Israel today? Did that shape anything?
Well, you know, the film for me was a way to talk about Israel. I think that was a very big part of the reason I wanted to make the film. It wasn't only about my mother, it is about my mother and my uncle and my grandfather and this family that had, by chance, an incredible impact on the built environment of a small country.
Oh my gosh.
So I thought that was interesting, and I thought it was a way to talk about Israel that wasn't about right or wrong or good or bad, but about nuance, about, you know, the dreams of the beginning, the disappointments of today. So I thought that was really interesting, a very, very different way. And what does it feel like to build in a place that is disappointing to you? I think my mother is deeply disappointed in what is happening today. She doesn't recognize the country compared to the country she grew up in. While it's a very celebratory film, for a mother who's sacrificed her entire life to build this place, for her to, at the end of the film, when I ask her, do you wish we had moved here? And she says, now, no. That's really tragic.
And yet she still lives there.
And she still lives there.
Even though her 3 kids live in the States.
That's right.
So is it just that generation?
It's the roots.
It's the roots.
It's the roots. But in terms of Israel, so everything in the film connected to her. And we had a difficult challenge even with the protest movement. I felt like because the protest movement was so much around the Supreme Court and the undermining of the government, or the attempt to undermine the Supreme Court, it felt like
judicial review. I mean, yes.
It felt like that was very important for the film. That to avoid that would be to avoid something that was central to kind of her experience. And so we put that in because she was connected to the Supreme Court. After October 7th, we really didn't know how to connect October 7th because she didn't have a particular connection story-wise beyond what every citizen's connection or every person in Israel's connection to that day. And so we couldn't figure that out. But it has been, as a filmmaker, I think October 7th has had a huge influence in terms of how Israeli filmmakers are seen abroad. I mean, there was a kind of steady attempt to ostracize Israeli filmmakers before October 7th, and there is a loud, silent, almost boycott of anything having to do with Israel since October 7th. I think for many of the festivals, it's just a fear, and so they'd just rather not deal with it. For others, it's just a outright dislike, even hatred. And that's really hard to take. I grew up in a family that really believed anti-Semitism was over. And it's hard to see, it's hard to understand the current feelings around Israeli filmmakers without feeling that so much of it is anti-Semitism. I mean, filmmakers, we have very complicated relationships with a country like Iran, but we revere Iranian filmmakers. We as Americans have a complicated relationship with Israel. Israel's filmmakers, for the most part, are incredibly left of center.
No question.
And yet the filmmakers out of Israel are now really
being discriminated
against. So it's a very, and the film I made before this one is on freedom of speech. It's about Floyd Abrams, and I find it just appalling that we're not watching watch the films. I think one can criticize the film I made about Ada, even politically, artistically, politically, but we should be looking at the material, on all of the material. We should, and when I say Israeli filmmakers are being discriminated against, it's not only on the Jewish side, it's also on the Arab side. So there's, that is also Semitism, so anti-Semitism. So it is across the board. And I think it's very, very dangerous.
Your film is rooted, your mother's architecture, as she makes very clear in this film, is rooted in the land. There's that connection that clearly you and your siblings have, your mother has. It's a questionable, it's a feeling that you struggle with. And I think in a certain way, I sense that you tried to stay away from it being too political of a film, and yet it's there. Those elements are there.
Yeah, they're really important to me. I mean, the end the end of the film has a letter that I find that my mother wrote to me so long ago. In the very end of the letter, she says, and this is a wish that she says from 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, she says, I hope you will find a place for this place in yourselves, about all of us. And I think for me that this film is that, you know, I think it is okay to have tremendous love and tremendous hurt and even criticism for a place. I think that's okay. I think we can live with those contradictions and try to make a place better and criticize a place that we love dearly. And I think the thing that surprises me the most, October 7th was such a surprise, and the development since October 7th, and my fears about what are happening in Israel, I never expected those fears to translate to my other home, which is here. And that is very, very disturbing.
Yeah. The film is called Ada, My Mother the Architect. It's a must film. It deals with so much, and yet it's so rooted in the people, the state of Israel, Zionism, its history, and a family who are very much builders of the land. And livnot ulehibanot. Your mother clearly helped build this land. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate it.